Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Uncanny Treks as we conclude our coverage of the Marvel Grand Design books as we look at the third and final X-Men Grand Design book, X-Tinction from 2019. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the Southland. Matt, how you doing this evening?
Doing pretty well, Bob. This is when X-Men gets weird.
This is the late Claremont run, the mid 80s to the late 80s, early 90s. I like this era. When I read the whole Claremont run, I'd read most of it about 10 years ago, and it's a strange era. I like how the status quo constantly shifts for the X-Men. It's soap operatic. And this is a pretty good comic, Matt, but I don't know if it did justice to what I love about the late Claremont run as much as it did justice to the Silver Age and the early Claremont run in the earlier two volumes.
When Claremont did this, it was a prototype for what we see later on with displacing the X-Men in other locations, seeing how they manage away from the school. But that's the second issue of X-Tinction, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Because the first issue of X-Tinction that we're about to discuss, beautiful cover, and it has the main star on the cover, Bob. It's Storm. A lot of focus on Storm in this issue of Grand Design.
If Jean Grey was the star of Second Genesis #1 and Rogue was the star of Second Genesis #2, then yeah, Storm would be the star of X-Tinction #1.
I need to apologize to the listeners as well, because in the last issue of Grand Design we covered, I thought they had pretty much wrapped up everything with Storm involving Forge and the loss of her powers. They really did take a lot of time to flesh out those particular stories in this volume of Grand Design, which led to some confusion with you later on down the road when you thought that we got further along with X-Men and Grand Design.
This also covers a lot of years, maybe 85 to 91 or thereabouts.
We've been doing this for a long time. It's probably the second time I need to apologize to the listeners, but man, I also mentioned that I thought Psylocke played they didn't have a lot of, they didn't cover Psylocke much in this, but they do explain it, but not to the degree that you're going to understand it well. It's glossed over.
Although, honestly, and this is jumping ahead, but since we're there, we'll just do it. I like this version better because it takes out the weird and problematic body theft of the woman Quanon or Revanche's body. I think it works a little smoother here, although you're right that it's elliptical and not very developed.
I told the listeners you're going to be confused when you do get to that part, but it is different.
We're focused on Storm, and we have a lot of Storm dealing with being depowered as a result of Forge's gun, and we also have her returning to the X-Men and having the famous duel with Cyclops, which is a great issue, right? And defeating Cyclops in the duel to become the leader of the X-Men, even though she's depowered. That's one of my favorite issues of X-Men. It's a great issue of X-Men. It's also Storm is taking on the punk look, the Mohawk look. But the one thing that this comic adds to that I really didn't dig on page 3 is the comic seems to imply that Madeline Pryor used some sort of latent mutant ability to will Storm into beating Cyclops. I don't think that's in the original, and I frankly don't care for it.
That's a good point, Bob, because I don't understand. To me, that takes away from Storm as a character, showing that she was strong enough to defeat Cyclops in hand-to-hand combat, even depowered. That was the whole point. That's a necessary change.
It is only an implication. It's not something that is outright said, but I don't care for it. But Matt, something you cared for comes about 10 pages later on page 13.
On page 13, Bob, we get a specific callback to a character that I remember reading. I didn't know this, and I watched the cartoon in the early 90s, and Longshot is on this panel. And it's Wolverine literally pointing out that he only has 3 fingers, which confuses me because he technically has 4 fingers, but they're not counting a thumb as a finger.
This has long been a feature of Longshot, but I don't know how consistent people are doing it, but I did not know this until well into adulthood because I don't make a habit of counting the fingers. It is funny. I also like in that same panel, while Wolverine is checking out Longshot's 3 fingers and thumb, you have Dazzler and Rogue clearly checking out Longshot's behind.
Now, Bob, Rogue's outfit here, and this is a really weird fashion question, my apologies, but I didn't think she got this until the Jim Lee run, this outfit.
I'm not 100%, but I think you're right. Yeah. 15, we got Mr. Sinister holding Baby Cable upside down. Makes me laugh.
Mr. Sinister does not treat okay, for one thing, Ed Piskor's there's no issue drawing babies in weird positions like this. And Mr. Sinister has no qualms about messing with babies and torturing them. It's shown throughout this. There's nothing gory or nasty, but you'll see babies hooked up to stuff. It's the equivalent of the Borg baby in Star Trek Next Generation. Bob, a quick question on page 21 I want to ask you about. Do you think there's a reason that they dedicated a full panel to the other members of Forge's troop or whatever that died?
In part because Piskor likes doing these character layout panels, like this panel where you're seeing what parts of Forge's platoon in Vietnam got blown up. Piskor likes drawing panels like that. I don't know if you've read this story. So this is an adaptation of Fall of the Mutants, the second X-Men crossover. I don't love Fall of the Mutants, but this is a pretty big deal in Fall of the Mutants. That gets to one of the things I found surprising about this issue overall. So it covers a few other things too, but it's mainly covering the first three big X-Men crossovers. And so it's doing the Mutant Massacre where the Morlocks gets killed by Mr. Sinister's Marauders. It's doing the Fall of the Mutants, which is this stuff with Forge and Storm and the Adversary and Forge's mentor, and that ends with the X-Men seeming to get killed in Dallas and exiled to the Outback. Then it's also doing Inferno, which is the crossover where the Goblin Queen, Madeline Pryor, gets her vengeance on the world because she makes the deals with the demons from Limbo. I didn't remember this about X-Men Grand Design at all, and it's fascinating that this issue's goal is basically to do those three huge crossovers.
When they do end up in the Outback, though, that is the best part.
I remember having a couple of random issues from the Outback era when we were kids, and reading it out of context is the most random, confusing thing, but reading it as an adult, I like it more. It's very bizarre, very interesting.
They meet Gateway. Gateway teleports somewhere they needs to go. And there's this weird... Page 28, Bob, has a weird panel where they're really hot out there, so they just start taking their clothes off, and we get this gratuitous, I don't know.
I think that's somewhat in the spirit of the Outback era. And you also notice that the Reavers, not all of them, but a lot of the Reavers show skin too.
I'd forgotten about the picture mirror, the Siege Perilous, Bob. Did you remember this thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is important in Arthurian myth, too. We might have talked about it in some other context on the podcast before. It's handled a little differently. Listeners, it's been 10 years since I've read the Outback era X-Men, so apologies if I'm vague on the specifics, but I don't believe in the Outback era it involved alternate universes. I believe the deal was if you went through the Siege Perilous, you would awaken in a new life on this Earth, but you wouldn't necessarily go to a parallel universe is not how I remember it. So it's presented and explained a little differently, but yeah, the Siege Perilous is an important part of the fallout from Fall of the Mutants and in the Outback era of X-Men.
Bob, honestly, we end this tale with them going back to the old time-honored tradition of combining their powers.
Indeed.
Is that the story, the go-to comic book story? Oh, we can't do this, so we have to combine and collaborate and work together to solve the problem, to defeat the greater enemy. That's it, right? That's the story.
The Krakoa era with Hickman on House of X and Powers of 10, and then Al Ewing on Sword really takes that to new dimensions. So yeah.
Issue number 2. Who do we have on the cover? Kitty Pryde, Bob. Who's the main star of Days of Future Past?
Is Kitty Pryde really the main star of this issue? Definitely she's the main star of Days of Future Past, but is she really the main star of this issue?
A valid point, Bob, because I agree. She's the cover star here. She's the one that they're focusing on. She's got her blue outfit on one side. On the other half, she's aged, and she's got the Days of Future Past look that she had. Yeah. But that is what they're following here, and that is to the extent that the grand design does go is Days of Future Past.
One might argue that, granted, as the issue at the end turns into Days of Future Past, definitely Kitty gets important on the last few pages, but you could argue that either Jean or Jubilee ought to be on the cover of this one if you're just going off of relative presence in the book. You see what I'm saying?
I understand that, but we're going to talk about Jubilee in a minute, because for some reason, the 90s skewed my understanding of Jubilee.
I wanted to start on page 5, where we see Professor X hanging out with Lilandra. We see him from panel to panel. We have in one panel, Professor X, he's weapon Xing himself into Cerebro. Then in the other panel, he's laying in bed reading with Lilandra. That cracked me up.
Do you think that was a callback to the Bob Newhart ending?
Oh, I never really watched the Bob Newhart show, so I couldn't say.
Let's talk about page 12 for a minute, because this is where we do run in. We know that Wolverine gets crucified on an X. That's a famous thing from this time period. That I remember. Famous. It's the only reason I know anything about the Outback era is because I saw that image and I was like, when did that happen? But as Wolverine is being crucified, Jubilee comes to his rescue. Jubilee. Yeah. And Jubilee apparently had her own little hidey hole in Australia.
Oh, she joined the team, yeah.
Where she was surviving because she followed them into Gateway's portal from the mall.
That's how she joined the X-Men, yep.
Now, any of you listeners that watch the cartoon know this is so far from the origin story from the 92 cartoon that it's hard for me to accept this. is what it is. Does that make sense, Bob?
Structurally, it's pretty similar. In both cases, it's her following the X-Men and getting into some stuff. It's Sentinels in the cartoon and it's the Reavers in the comics. And in both cases, it's your mechanized opponent.
My issue is her falling through a portal and ending up in Australia and hiding out in Australia and rescuing Wolverine from being crucified. That's where it takes a leap for me.
Weird evolution of the Claremont run that got the X-Men from the mansion to on the run to getting killed in Dallas to hiding out of the Outback. So maybe this is just, I've known this for a long time, but it feels pretty natural to me.
I was introduced to her in the cartoon.
And listeners, we were too young to read the Outback era when it was coming out. We were when it was happening.
They should have just retconned her origin to be more aligned with what it was in the cartoon. But that's just me.
That's awful. That's just you're doing the Claremont run. You're not doing the cartoon. You can't change it to make it more like the cartoon.
I want them to go back and retroactively change her origin, Bob. And I want them to pick somebody else to get her off.
That's why Jubilee and Wolverine are close, is that she saved him from being crucified on the X.
And I do not like this part of the comics.
You literally have never read one of the best eras of X-Men. And you're sitting here, it
looks so stupid.
It should be like, you should read the Claremont run, man.
I've read the beginning of the Claremont run up through the Brood stuff.
Read the whole bloody thing. The whole bloody thing.
He wants me to read the rest of it.
This is boiling it down to 3 panels an issue. Obviously, it's not the best way to do it.
It's not the best way.
No, and definitely, I'm not saying you should read any Claremont after X-Men number 3.
Okay.
Just pretend Claremont never comes back to the book. I'm sorry, Chris. You did great work. I don't mean to insult your late 90s, early aughts, or 2010s work, but it's terrible. You don't need to read any of it. But you need to read the whole Claremont run. From whenever he comes on, I think it's X-Men 96, X-Men 97, that until he gets fired with X-Men 3. That whole 17 years is amazing, and there are very few misses.
That whole 17 years, no misses. Okay, Bob.
Look, we're both nostalgic for the cartoon. I get it. I also didn't read the Outback era when I was a kid, and the cartoon is the most familiar. But no, you should absolutely not retcon or tamper with the Claremont run to make it more like a mediocre cartoon. That's an awful idea.
That's why I'm not in charge of it. I'm not the Bill DeMayo.
I'm regretting that we did X-Men Grand Design now. Ed Piskor did about as good a job with this as one could do with this project, right?
Yeah.
But this is such a flawed way to encounter, for the first time, some of the best X-Men comics of all time. It's a tragedy in that way.
That's a great point, Bob. Yeah, you've read the Claremont run, and you probably read it before reading this.
Oh, yeah.
Like I said, I've read it to the Brood Saga in that general area.
The part that runs from Giant Size X-Men through the Brood Saga, that's the part that's more referenced in more later X-Men comics, and it's more iconic.
Why do you think that is, Bob?
The Outback stuff is referenced a lot. Punk Storm is referenced a lot. Havoc's tenure on the team is referenced a lot. This stuff has a lot of influence too, but I am granting you though that the Brood Saga and before is more iconic. And this stuff is weirder, but weird in a good way. And honestly, if X-Men comics had spent the 90s trying to be weird like this, instead of being nostalgia fest for the first couple years of the Claremont run, I think the franchise would have been healthier.
Well, all that being said, my favorite panel, it's on page 12. Wolverine decapitates Bonebreaker after Jubilee rescues him. There's something about seeing this head flying off, and to remind you that these are robots. The head of Bonebreaker is yelling "crikey" to remind us that he's in Australia.
Rob,
it's well remembered.
Let's just randomly rewrite parts of Superman or Batman to be more like this cartoon. Some kid who's watching My Adventures with Superman right now, that great cartoon, and in 20 years is going to be super nostalgic for that amazing, wonderful cartoon, My Adventures with Superman, is going to be, you know what, when DC's retelling All-Star Superman, when DC is retelling Superman versus Muhammad Ali, they should change it to be more like My Adventures with Superman. Why don't they make it look more manga style?
Bob, you wait. 20 years from now, we'll be doing a podcast episode on whatever stupid Superman show they come up with. Trust me, that we're going to have this conversation. You're probably going to get Muhammad Ali in the style of My Adventures with Superman.
Like, I'm not objecting to the idea that, obviously, in future X-Men cartoons, you don't give Jubilee the Outback origin because it's too complicated to explain. But
Yeah.
I'm objecting to your idea of you
Of
go
changing
back
the
and
origin.
she pulls a man
Man.
off a cross in the Outback. He's being crucified on a St. Andrew's cross in the Outback, and she pulls him off.
A reason for being in the Outback that bothers me more than anything, Bob.
She's a mall rat who saw some ladies she thought were cool shopping and then followed them through a mysterious portal. That's like a basic premise of like fantasy storytelling. Like,
had Wolverine been crucified in a mall, Bob, I would be okay with this origin.
it's a lot neater to have them in the abandoned Reavers headquarters in the Outback than in that stupid mansion in Westchester that I'm so tired of seeing.
Bob hates the mansion.
I hate the mansion. I
such
hate that we have back to them.
Such an edgy X-Men opinion.
The best times in X-Men history are when they're not in the mansion. It's the late Claremont run. It's when you've got Brubaker and Fraction and Kieran Gillen having them in San Francisco. It's when you have them on Krakoa. They're the most interesting when they're not at the mansion.
The Krakoa era is amazing. And also, when they do go to San Francisco, it's great. And have you read any of the stuff with Cyclops in Alaska?
I started it and was not loving it as a follow-up to the Krakoa era. Then you got to issues where it felt like they were gratuitously taking a dump on the Krakoa era, where it's, oh, Magneto was paralyzed because the resurrection protocols were flawed. And I can't do this. The guy who's writing Uncanny X-Men right now, Jed McKay, I usually like his stuff. So I'll give it a try when the run is done. But it seemed like they were intentionally trying to alienate me as a Krakoa fan, and it worked.
They did a pretty good job, apparently.
It's less than the current writers. Jed McKay and Gail Simone are capable of writing good comics. Making Tom Brevoort the editor, it was a real big mistake. I don't like Brevoort's public persona, and I don't like the direction he's moved the X-Men books in. It seems needlessly antagonistic. I get that they weren't going to do Krakoa forever. The one other thing you wanted to say from issue number 2 is Forge gets Ghostbusters, and you like...
Oh, yeah, there were a couple of things I did want to point out towards the end here, Bob. They drew Forge with a PKE meter, which I was, whoa. Now, if you don't know what a PKE meter is, it's a meter that measures psychokinetic energy in Ghostbusters. And this is a throwback. Appreciated that.
This is a part of, they're doing the 4th crossover with Genosha's X-Tinction agenda. It's weaker than, I think Inferno, Fall of the Mutants, and Mutant Massacre are all fascinating, although Fall of the Mutants I'm not a huge fan of, but they're all fascinating. X-Tinction agenda, less interesting, but it's this big Genosha crossover that they're doing here. 2 kind of meta points to flag for you about this that you might find interesting. It's interesting that they're using X-Tinction agenda, then they're saying, oh, what if X-Tinction agenda went really poorly? And they're using that to set up Days of Future Past. That's a fascinating way for Piskor to end this series, because he skipped Days of Future Past where it would have gone in Second Genesis. Now we're coming back around to it. So I was interested by that. I don't know if you had any thoughts on the Days of Future Pastness of it all in this final issue.
I did like that they went in that direction, and there were a couple of, not loose ends, but there were areas that he did not explore that I think may have needed more explanation. One is Cable. Cable just shows up in this last set. There's no real explanation. I know who he is, but there's nothing that explains his presence.
An interesting choice that Piskor makes in these is that he's only focusing on what happens in Uncanny X-Men.
Cool.
Because starting with Mutant Massacre, you have New Mutants and X-Factor coming out as... Mm-hmm. And so you have New Mutants and you have X-Factor regularly showing up in these couple of issues to participate in some of the crossover activity like they would have in the X-Men book. But you get no context on
no explanation.
X-Factor
They're
at
just
all.
there.
And maybe that's the most severe, because you at least see a little bit of stuff with like Baby Cable, although I don't think it's ever made clear that...
No, it's not.
But you also don't even see Jean Grey's resurrection. It's just alluded to. In a way, that makes perfect sense, because Jean Grey's resurrection takes place in a Fantastic Four and Avengers story, and it's a terrible story, dear listener.
All they do in this book is show you the news story from that, and they have an interview with Scott and Jean on one panel.
There's some reference to Reed Richards calling Scott, things like that. But yeah, that's really handled in an offhand way. And the initial fallout from Jean's resurrection is her joining X-Factor with Scott, which is also basically not handled in this. And you just have Jean and Scott and the rest of X-Factor showing up at moments of crossover, especially with Inferno and X-Tinction agenda. So it's an interesting way of handling it. And I see why he did it. And I don't even think it's bad, but I do think the overall effect, and probably you wouldn't give this book to a new reader anyway, But I do think the overall effect of this is if you're not deeply familiar with X-Men history, this is just indecipherable. It was always challenging if you weren't deeply familiar with X-Men history, but I could see a novice getting something out of the first two miniseries. I just don't see how a novice would get anything at all from this.
There's too many things going on at this time.
There's too much going on the page, and there's also too much going on off the page.
On page 29, that is to some degree highlighted when you have all the characters from different teams on trial for war crimes against Genosha, and you have everybody in shackles. They have a whole team image. You've got Archangel there. They did not go into any detail about Archangel.
That's all X Factor, yeah.
You got Beast, who's blue fur. We'll never get that explained. You got Cable there, no shirt on. You've got Gambit, who they describe how he's found by Storm after her life has changed.
He joins the X-Men after meeting Teen Storm, which we had the long back and forth about Jubilee's origin, but it's also funny how strange Gambit's origin is in the context of the Claremont, with Storm having gone through the Siege Perilous and being amnesiac and teenaged, right? And so it's Gambit and Teen Storm team up as thieves as the introduction of Gambit. So that's obviously when you're making the cartoons, right, you don't recreate that story. Obviously, the ways that Rogue and Gambit and Jubilee come onto the X-Men are deeply complicated in the Claremont run.
Yes, Bob, and if you could not do that in a child's cartoon, I understand.
Yes, but it's your suggestion that you should then go back and, in mainstream Marvel history, you should just erase that? That's what makes me angry.
Poor Bob doesn't believe in retconning for the better. You know, Bob, I want to write my own grand design without you. My grand design, Jubilee, was found in a mall by the Sentinels.
I'm speechless. It's like you're suggesting that you should go back and retcon whole swaths of the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Man.
Bob, no. I do like the 92 X-Men origin of Jubilee better than the one by Claremont, but I understand what you're saying. Okay, I just want to make that clear. That's a hard opinion, Bob.
I think it's appropriate that our podcast about X-Men Grand Design ends in the same way that the X-Men Grand Design ends, with just weird retconning as the Days of Future Past is averted.
You get a big blink like we did in that previous issue, but it's not a full page blink. It's a half page blink. Did you notice that? To start as the bombs drop?
Yeah, a smaller blink than the Phoenix blink.
Then you got everything from Days of Future Past that we all remember. Same types of stuff. It's taken over, burning down the White House, confusing non-mutants for mutants.
Listeners, I should also say Matt did a lot of apologizing this episode for misleading you. I also misled you in the first couple because I did not remember how this final volume played out. For some reason, I had in my head that they got into the 90s and maybe even up to the Morrison run, which they totally do not do. The Grand Design is just 6 issues that covers the Silver Age, some of the backstory, and the first Claremont run. That's all it covers. It doesn't go any further than that. Matt misled you, listeners. I also misled you. I apologize for that.
It has an ending, it's Days of Future Past ending similar to the film, in my opinion.
Yeah, also weirdly similar to a Fantastic Four Grand Design, which also ends with Days of Future Past.
Right.
Well, Days of Future Past, and then it time travels back to the time when the thing was Blackbeard. But yeah. Matt, should we talk about ranking this thing?
Sure, Bob. Where would we put this?
My initial thought might have been higher, but I've got to say, even though I'm fond of the comics that this final miniseries, these final 2 issues are covering, it a little bit lowers my estimation of the whole series. And again, in a weird way, you would never give this to a novice, right?
No.
Never. But in another weird way, I could almost see doing it before this last series. But this last series, I've already said, is so complicated. And not criticizing Piskor, just how you had to do this. You have to leave out and distort so much that, honestly, I could hear other arguments, right? I'm not dead set on this or anything, but if you look at our list, listeners, of the 35 comics we've covered on the podcast so far, we put Fantastic Four Grand Design at number 31, and we have Avengers AI at number 30. Before I thought maybe higher, but now honestly, after this last miniseries, I'm comfortable just putting it in as the new number 31 after Avengers AI and above FF Grand Design. I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Okay, are we planning on covering Hulk Grand Design for the podcast?
No, I would say the only circumstances we would cover Hulk Grand Design under would be that we cover a lot of other Hulk stuff for the podcast. And I'm not hostile to doing that, but I'm also not enthusiastic to do that.
Okay. I say this because for listeners, I had never read a Hulk comic, like really, in my life. So reading Hulk Grand Design completely is just a pipe dream. It's hard to understand anything that's going on at all in it. Fantastic Four Grand Design, I did enjoy.
I would say, Matt, if you wanted to get familiar with Hulk, I don't think it would require as intense the amount of reading as we did with the Kirby run, or as much as X-Men as we've read over our lives.
Right.
Because we've been preparing to read this comic our whole lives, and we prepared for reading FF Grand Design by reading 88 issues of
Yeah,
run.
we had plenty of Fantastic Four. And that's the thing, too. In my brain here, I'm sitting here looking at these ranks like, why is Bob wanting to rank X-Men above Fantastic Four? But I think he's right, because X-Men, that is legit.
Oh, you don't see why I think this is better than FF Grand Design?
No, I do understand now, because the complexity of everything, the number of volumes, and then Grand Design, Fantastic Four Grand Design retells the Jack Kirby run.
Yeah, some stuff, but yeah.
Just having to take something extremely complex and try to turn it into something that has a fluent story, which is why it runs into issues in the last run, because in the last volumes, because it's wackadoodle when they go to Australia, Bob, which we discussed this podcast.
And it's also trying to tell the history of X-Men through only one book, when by that point there were 4 X-Men books.
There's a lot more intricate connections. I bring in Hulk Grand Design because Hulk Grand Design to me is, I read it, I understood what was happening, but I have absolutely no recollection of the events. It was almost like reading a Wikipedia article on the Hulk, just with colorful pictures, which is not a knock. It's just the Hulk is not as fleshed out as X-Men or Fantastic Four.
We're not going to rank Hulk Grand Design, listeners, because neither of us know that much about the Hulk. We couldn't have, I think, a worthwhile episode about Hulk Grand Design.
No, we couldn't.
The 2 reasons I think X-Men Grand Design is better than FF Grand Design, one is it better does a harder task of FF Grand Design is drawing from other periods, but it's mostly focused on those 88 issues, about 8 years of the Kirby Lee run on Fantastic Four. Whereas X-Men Grand Design is focused on the 17 years of the Claremont run, plus the Silver Age, and then plus a lot of other backstory like FF Grand Design. Then also on a readability level, now granted, X-Men Grand Design is 3 times as long as FF Grand Design, but on a readability level, X-Men Grand Design is easier, more pleasing, and more artistic to read because Piskor is working with slightly bigger panels. And even though it is a postage stamp comic, it's not as much like FF Grand Design literally feels a lot of times you're reading 1 postage stamp per issue of the Kirby Lee run.
There's a different storytelling going on, the way it's laid out with the postage stamps. Fantastic Four Grand Design at times with the number of postage stamps can be hard on the eyes.
Dealing with 5 rows of 5 panels each is the average, I think, on FF Grand Design, which is crazy.
But he's also trying to evoke the Kirby style, so you're having to do that in that small of a area.
And that's a great point, too, of something else that's a little bit more complex, that Scioli is referencing other FF comics, but it's mostly Jack Kirby, whereas Piskor is having to reference a run that contains multiple artists, so Dave Cockrum, John Byrne, John Romita Jr., Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee, Barry Windsor-Smith, a couple of others I'm forgetting. Then also Jack Kirby for the Silver Age, plus Warner Roth and Neil Adams. Artistically, Piskor has a much more complicated synthesis to do than Scioli, too.
But it's so evident throughout the book that they shift the styles depending on the years. I do like that piece, I will say. That has been fascinating.
I don't know, like, how good an idea they are, but they do a questionable idea, especially X-Men Grand Design, about as well as you could. And they're both, even though I don't like some choices in the FF Grand Design, like you've said about both, they're essential reference points.
If you've read enough X-Men, you'll enjoy these books, no doubt. If you're on the fence and you've read enough, you feel like you've read enough X-Men, you jump on them. It's almost like a challenge, Bob, when you open these. Okay, let's see how much X-Men I really do know.
It's interesting because they were both clearly like challenges for Piskor and Scioli and Jim Rugg on Hulk to do as artists. And then, they're also like challenges for us as readers, right? How much do you remember? How much can you follow? Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this excursion through Grand Design, which in a way, this exemplifies what Matt's saying. I wanted us to be able to refresh ourselves on the Chris Claremont run without, unfortunately, at some point I would love to do the Claremont run with Matt. That's 17 years. That's a lot of comics. That's not on the horizon anytime soon. We are doing this as a prologue to talking about Grant Morrison's X-Men run, which is of a much more manageable side, only 6 small trades. Tune in with us next week as we begin our coverage of Grant Morrison's X-Men run.
And the best part is, listeners, Matt has previously read those comics.
So rereading is easier than reading.
Oh, 100 times.
Usually. All right. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the Southland. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.